Hey everyone, this is Kenji, and I'm making some corn soup. So I have a couple of recipes for corn soup and corn chowder that I'm going to link to in the description down there. But I'm not following either of them as is usual because I don't have all those ingredients on hand, and I'm just going to wing it with what I got. So starting with some butter. Corn and butter go well together. And a couple tablespoons. Let me get this video going. Get a couple tablespoons in this pot here, and I'm just going to heat that up on low heat. So just until it's kind of melted. We don't really want it to brown at all. Right around there is good. Let's see. So normally on corn soup, I would use something like leeks because I find leeks and corn go really well together. I mean, leeks in general go well into soups. Today, what I'm going to do is I have all these random things. I got some sliced fennel and red onion from a salad I made the other day. I've got these celery sticks because my family was up in Napa for the weekend, and we bought some celery sticks for my daughter for the car. I think I got them at a gas station. So I'm going to be... Oh, hold on a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to use these celery sticks I had. I also got some random scallion bottoms here. I got some garlic, and I got a hatch chili. So, you know, this is almost, the combination I'm using here is almost like the sort of Cajun Holy Trinity, the Cajun mirepoix, which is bell peppers, onions, and celery. And, oh my goodness, I apologize if I'm mixing up Creole and Cajun. I probably am, and I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments. I'm not going to look it up right now, but I'm probably mixing the two up, which I know I shouldn't do. But carrots, onions, celery, onions, and bell peppers. This is a sort of variation on that. We got celery in there. This is actually this is not a hatch chili. This is just a regular Anaheim. Hatch are Anaheims that are grown in a specific area and sort of marketed under a specific term that tend to be a little bit spicier than your standard sort of supermarket or farmer's market Anaheim chili. But that's okay because this one I don't want the soup to be particularly spicy. You could use no peppers at all. You could use bell pepper. You could use something like a cubanelle or a shishito. You could use a jalapeno or serrano if you actually do want it spicy. Just a rough chop on that. In you go. Fennel's a flavor I find goes nice with corn also. That's all going to go in. Let me turn this up a little bit more. Let me grab a... Use this guy. So these vegetables, we just want to kind of soften them up. One of the recipes I'm going to link to below uses a pressure cooker, which actually is a great way to make corn soup if you want. You'll see what I'm going to do later, but there's a lot of flavor that's in the actual cobs that you can use to make like a corn stock, and a pressure cooker is actually a really good way to extract a lot of that flavor and sort of a lot of what's called the corn milk out of the ears without having to simmer a stock for a long time. But today I'm just making it on the stovetop because, well, I don't know why. I just felt like it. All right, some garlic cloves. I'll use maybe 3 of these guys. 1, 2, 3. Smack, smack, smack. People sometimes ask me whether using pre-minced garlic is okay. You don't need my permission to do anything. If you want to use pre-minced garlic, or if you've tried it in the past and you find that you enjoy the flavor, then go for it. Personally, I don't like using pre-minced garlic because, garlic is one of those ingredients where the more processed it is to begin with, the less flavor you're going to get out of it in the end, because a lot of the flavors are extremely volatile, and they're formed immediately after you chop or crush the garlic. So, if you really want fresh garlic flavor to come through in your food, then you need to use fresh garlic. There's not really any way around that. A compromise would be some of those pre-peeled garlic cloves that you can buy at any supermarket these days. The flavor in there is never going to be as good as in unpeeled garlic, because to get that garlic there, they blanch it, which deactivates some of its deactivates and destroys some of the more flavorful compounds in there. So even pre-peeled garlic is not going to have the same flavor as garlic that you peel and chop yourself. But then again, sometimes who cares? You don't need all that pure garlic flavor. And I'm sure there are some people in here who are going to disagree with me, but so do whatever makes you comfortable. I'm not going to tell you one way is right or wrong. All right, so the rest of these scallions, I'm going to just slice up to use as garnish later. When I slice scallions for garlic, I do what's called a back slice. So if I get down and you can see, so normally what you'll see a lot of people do is this sort of chopping motion where you push the knife forward and down. And with a very sharp knife, that's fine, but it can crush the food that you're trying to cut instead of slicing. And something very delicate like scallions, what I prefer to do is what I call the back slice, which is where you cut on the back stroke. So you put the blade of the knife down like this, and then you slowly pull it backwards, and you use like a very you use the entire, not the entire length of the knife, but a much wider length of the knife than you do with a forward slice. And the more you're really slicing instead of chopping. And what that ends up doing is that it gives you much nicer slices, particularly for things like scallions and chives that can really get crushed using a more traditional, typical knife stroke. So that's a back slice for you. I'm gonna get these guys in some water so that they stay nice and crisp and fresh until we need them later. Okay. Now the corn. All right, so I'm gonna shuck a few ears of corn. This is white corn from the farmer's market. You can use yellow corn, white corn. Corn. It used to be that corn. This type of corn, sweet corn, the sugars in them would be very pronounced when you first picked them, and then they would quickly convert into starches. With modern varietals of corn, especially these, super sweet corns, the sugars, they're bred in such a way that that the sugars don't actually break down into starches very quickly. So even corn that's been picked and out of the field for a week can still taste nice and sweet these days. But that said, it's never going to be quite as sweet and flavorful as when you first pick it. So we're gonna take the kernels off here. I know Alton Brown does this thing with a bunt pan where you put it upside down, and it works. That said, I don't usually feel like pulling out a bunt pan every time I shuck some corn. So what I do is I start cutting down like this, and to avoid my knife hitting the bowl, I basically get about halfway down and then lift up the corn like that. And that way, you don't like smack your knife against the bowl. And and if you have a big enough cutting board, who cares if a little of the corn falls off to the side, right? Okay, so we're gonna do that with all 3 ears, and then afterwards, I'll show you what we're gonna do. The other trick you can use is doing something like this, where you put like a little cup upside down in the center. And if you find that makes things much easier for you, go for it. I usually don't bother with tricks like this just for a small number of corn. If I was making like a giant batch of corn soup and I had like a dozen ears of corn to shuck, I probably would do something like this, but just like 2 or 3 ears, I don't bother. All right. So, got our corn. Again, we want all this stuff to soften but not brown. Looks like we're getting pretty close here, actually, to where we want it. All right, and now for the rest of this corn, what we're going to do is we're going to scrape the back with a knife like this. Scrape with the back of a knife. And the idea is that we want to really extract every last bit of edible corn out of the cob, and also the corn milk. Because that's what's going to, first of all, add a lot of corn flavor, but also it's that sort of starchy, milky liquid that comes out. So you can see it all here, like that kind of starchy, milky liquid. That's going to help thicken up the soup later on and give it a lot more body. And sort of give it an almost, you know, dairy-like texture, like a heavy cream-like texture without actually having to add any heavy cream, so that you really reinforce that corniness, which is something you learn to do as a dad. You know, one of the nice things of doing this in a pressure cooker is that you can kind of skip this step. All that stuff kind of gets extracted anyway through the high pressure and the higher temperature that a pressure cooker gets you. But I'm not doing it in a pressure cooker. So yeah, so all this stuff here, all this, like this stuff, that stuff that would have been left behind, and you can see, all right, there, you see that? That's all that corn milk that we want to go into here. When you're sauteing ingredients like this, when you're sweating them out, you're going to hear a sort of distinct difference in sound between when things are sweating, that is when they're sort of like actively expressing moisture, versus when they start to dry and actually, you know, the temperature starts to go up and they actually start to fry. It's sort of like a, you know, the difference between a kind of sputtering, soft, boiling, simmering sound versus a sort of more of like a crackle and pop that you get from frying. So once you start hearing that difference, you know that your vegetables are on the verge of starting to brown, and so you want to stop the cooking there. In this case, we're going to stop the cooking by adding in our corn. Let me get a spatula so we really get all that corn juice out of here, corn milk. All right. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break the cobs up, kind of nestle them down in there. And then I'm going to go over and add some water. And so essentially, you know, you could, if I was doing this in a restaurant, what I would do is I would make a separate stock out of the corn cobs. I would make a corn stock out of the corn cobs and other sort of fresh aromatic vegetables. So leeks, onions, probably a little bit of fennel, some bay leaf, some herbs, maybe some tarragon in there, which goes nicely with corn. I would make a separate stock. But in this case, this is just home cooking. I'm just going to bring this all up to a simmer. And then we're going to let it go for about 15 minutes, and that's about it. Okay, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say simmer sesame. All right, so we're at a little simmer here now. I'm going to let this go for about... I added a couple bay leaves, by the way, while the camera is off. I'm going to let this go for about 15 minutes. It doesn't hurt to let it go longer. You could let it go for up to like 45 minutes or so. You know, past that, you're not really going to be extracting much more flavor. But I'd say around 15 minutes is sort of the minimum amount you want to go to make sure that the vegetables are cooked through and that you've extracted a good amount of flavor from those corn cobs. In the meantime, the other thing I'm doing over here is that I am slowly rendering out some... This is pepperoni. I find, you know, spiced pork products go really well. Or cured pork goes really well with corn. So I'm going to use this as a garnish. This is just literally a pepperoni stick that I cut into little triangles, quartered lengthwise, cut into little triangles, and I'm now just frying in its own fat. No added oil here. If you wanted, you could do something like a Spanish chorizo. You could do bacon. You could do ham. If you're doing ham, you'd probably need to add a little bit of extra fat. But any kind of cured pork would go great with corn soup. And if you don't, you know, if you don't eat meat, the other thing you could do is take some olive oil and infuse it with a bit of paprika. Smoked paprika is great, actually. So just simmer, you know, put some olive oil on the stovetop, put a little bit of smoked paprika in it, bring it up until it sizzles a little bit, and then shut it off, and it will turn into this beautiful bright red oil that you can then use to garnish your soup. In fact, I'm going to pull out a little bit of pull out a little bit of smoked paprika here just to add to that pepperoni, just to sort of reinforce that flavor. Where's my smoked paprika? Smoked paprika, smoked paprika. There's nope. Where's my smoked paprika? Black cardamom. Oh, here we are. Spicy regular. I have no idea how this opens. Ah, there we go. There's a brand new bottle. All right, I'm gonna snap and it's gonna be open. Ready? Thank you. Magic of shutting off the camera and turning it back on again. All right, I'm gonna add a little bit of smoked paprika to this oil, just to give it a little bit of smoky flavor, a little bit more color. And I've just the pepperoni is about as crispy as I want it, so I've shut off the heat, put my paprika in there. Just gonna let that infuse as it cools down. And then it'll be ready to go. All right, I will see you all back again in just about 15 minutes. Okay, so our soup is just about ready to puree. So the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull out those bay leaves and the spent corn cobs. You know, while I do this, I'm gonna quickly gripe about one thing. So this burner is an induction burner from Breville and Polyscience called the Control Freak. It's wonderful. The one gripe I have about it, and this ties into a question that I get a lot from people, which is asking about what temperature I cook certain things at. They're asking for specific temperatures on a pan. Temperature is only useful in an oven. It's not useful It's not really that useful on a pan surface because temperature, the way things cook are affected not just by the temperature, but also by the pan material. What you really care about on a pan is not temperature, but you care about heat flux. So like the heat that's going in versus the heat that's coming out. And that's what's going to translate to different types of cooking. So on this burner, you can adjust both the flux, which is this slow, medium, and fast. That's how fast energy is being pumped into the pan, and you can set the temperature. So right now, this is set. This is when you turn it to a set temperature of 240 degrees. They call that a simmer, but it's not really a simmer because a simmer is not a specific temperature. It can be a range of temperatures, but really what a simmer is when the energy that's going into a pan, the net input is just at the right level such that water is converting to steam at a very low rate. That's what a simmer is. It's not a specific temperature. Certainly it's not 240 degrees because your water at a simmer, even water at a boil, is never going to get to 240 degrees. You can see it's at 210 right now, and that's sort of what a fast simmer would be. So on this burner, when I want to simmer, I set it to slow, and then I set the temperature anywhere above 212 degrees, and it's going to basically be a fast simmer. Anyhow, that's my little gripe. Simmer is not a temperature, it's a measure of heat flux. All right, in net heat in and out. Okay, so now I'm gonna blend this an easy way in the pan. If you really want like a super smooth puree, you can do it in a blender. In fact, you know what? Maybe I'll show you. You've seen me blend things with a hand blender before. Maybe I'll do this in an actual blender just to show you how, in a restaurant, how a so-called professional cook would blend a hot soup to make it smooth. So I got a real powerful blender here. This is a Vitamix. Vitamix and Blendtec, those are sort of the two names in the game when it comes to high-powered blenders. I use a Vitamix just because I have always used one, and I like how the controls are analog, not digital. Fewer things tend to go wrong with analog controls. I'm also just sort of used to working with it, but I've also had experience with Blendtec blenders, and those are real nice too. All right, so when you're pureeing hot foods, the trick is you don't want to start covering it. So what can happen is you have food that's on the verge of boiling, so it's letting off steam. So when you create a vortex, suddenly you're creating lots of agitation, and you're also increasing the surface area. So what can happen is steam can form very rapidly, and if you seal the top here, that rapidly produced steam can blow the top off the blender, and then you get soup all over your ceiling. So what you do is you put a towel on top like that, and you hold it, and then you want to start at the lowest possible setting. So in this case, that's very low. And from there, slowly build up. That way you don't have that real sudden burst of steam that comes. you're at high, you can just do that. Now, in true restaurant fashion, I'm also going to emulsify some butter into there. A few more tablespoons for that whole pot. Just to really give it some extra richness. And I haven't yet seasoned this with any salt, so I know it's going to need that. In this case, I'm not going to put any pepper in there. If I was going to put pepper, I would use white pepper just to maintain the color. But I don't think it's going to need pepper because it was pretty, all those vegetables are going to season it pretty well. A little bit more. You know what else I could use? I think it can use just a touch of sweetness. The corn is pretty sweet, but I'm going to add just a touch of honey to it to sort of accentuate that. Accentuate that corn sweetness. Yeah, that's perfect. Whoop. I should have slowly ramped it down just the same way that I ramped it up to avoid that little ploop that came out, but there it is. And now if you really want like a super smooth restaurant style puree, what you do, here, you grab one of these, a chinois. This chinois I have is like real old, 20 years old. I've had it for a long time. Super fine mesh strainer. This is a finer mesh strainer than, than your typical sort of, this is what most people would refer to as a fine mesh strainer. This is much finer than that. And this is really going to get you the sort of that velvety, smooth puree. Now, because it's so fine, purees have trouble passing through it. There's a couple ways to get it through. The first is to get a implement like this and just wrap it like that, and it should start coming through. The other method you can use, which is better generally for sort of thicker purees, so you wouldn't necessarily need it on a soup like this, but for thicker purees is you get a, well, you would get a ladle, but I don't seem to have one right now. Maybe they're all in the dishwasher. What you would do is you would get a ladle and kind of push it up and down like this, and that really gets it going through fast as well. But for a thin soup like this, the wrap method works just fine. And there you go, you're left with the kind of fibrous bits that are going to interfere with that super smooth texture. But you know, if you want them, you can always push them through like this. A ladle makes it easier to do. All right, I'm going to call that done. We don't need any of this stuff in there. And yeah, now we're ready to eat. So let me get a bowl. This soup, by the way, delicious as is, also delicious served cold, chilled. So I will actually probably eat some of this right now for lunch, and then put the rest in the fridge after it cools down. And my family will eat it cold for either dinner tonight or lunch tomorrow. All right. There's that. There's this crispy pepperoni, which I think goes wonderfully with corn. And some of that smoked paprika and pepperoni oil. And then just some scallions garnished on top. And that is done. So, creamy corn soup, pepperoni oil, scallions. Let's try some. Hot, delicious, and summery. All right, everyone. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.